Hello, hello, hello. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of TA Tech Unboxed. Each episode, we're speaking to the best in class software providers from the tools that have been built for us, the talent acquisition community. We're chatting to people behind the tools, why they chose to build things for this crazy world. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to look inside the box a little bit. We've challenged the guys to get as close to 7 minutes in the demo. I'm Chris Haslam and my co-host, Mr. Darren Bush.
Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
We've also been crazy recording for this series. Who have we got planned to be speaking to?
So we've got a great lineup. So Sile from MetaView, talking obviously about interview intelligence. Chris and Carl from Candidate FYI, talking about the importance of candidate portals in the market.
So many Chris's.
Sarah Lane from Meet and Engage as well, talking again about candidate portal and candidate engagement and attraction. And then we have lastly as well Andrew from Willow, talking about video interviewing. So it's
cool. That's a cool hacky tool. That I really liked my first couple of interactions with Andrew a few years ago. So I'm excited. Great. Okay, who do we have on the show today?
So Chris, today you've got Bradley Franks, head of sales at Applied. He's here to discuss how Applied removes bias from the hiring process. Before we get into Applied, Bradley, can you just share with us how someone with a BA in geography from Cambridge is now selling tech in the talent acquisition space?
Yeah, it does seem like a bit of a jump. Firstly, thanks Darren and Chris for having me. I think like when people think of geography, one of the things that they commonly associate that with is knowing capital cities and colouring in. And I think that the actual primary thing that I was interested in when I studied geography was like social inequality and development, and the way in which, different people from society have and different people don't have. And I think one of the things that really appealed to me about Applied was I was familiar with the behavioural insights team and sort of the governing body that Applied was built from. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of nudging, or Daniel Kahneman, or no thinking fast and slow, or be familiar with sort of behavioural science, economics. I know Freakonomics was sort of a big thing a couple of years back. And I was particularly interested when it came to thinking about my career path in getting involved in a startup, having an immediate impact, but getting involved in something that actually had a social purpose and that closed the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I think that's what is at the core of Applied's mission, and that's what really appealed to me. It was less talent tech and more making a difference, having an impact, and not sort of being a cog in a bigger machine.
That's a mission-driven hire if I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Right there.
Right.
You literally did the thing that you've moved into, which is very uncommon.
Absolutely.
I
was interested in. I was interested in the haves and the have-nots. I also did my dissertation on nightclubs, but that's a different discussion, I think.
That is definitely I'd love to explore that another time.
That's a show on its own. Like outside of your journey to be Applied, because you of course didn't.
Yeah.
You didn't go to uni, do your dissertation, and join Be Applied. Like, what were you doing before?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say, like, I'm still fairly early in my career. Like, despite having like a management role at Applied at a startup, so I left Applied, thought, what the hell do I want to do with my life? Actually, did a master's in sociology where I was there for about 2 weeks and thought, this isn't for me. I don't want to go down the academic path. And knew I wanted to get involved in tech, knew I wanted to work for a startup, but didn't really know where to start. If an organisation called Jumpstart, which is set up by Matthew Sari and Kabir, was around, I probably would have done that, which effectively is like a grad scheme, working at different startups and working as a generalist or as an entry-level salesperson or a marketeer, whatever it is. That wasn't available to me as an option. So I saw all of my friends going off and going down the traditional path that people from, privileged educational upbringing go down. Consulting, law school, some were still doing their doctor's qualifications. And none of that really appealed to me. Like I think to a certain extent I've always had a slight problem with hierarchy and have wanted to challenge it and perhaps authority that comes with a bigger organisation. So I thought, I'm going to go and work for another startup. And it just so happened that I knew somebody who'd set up a food tech startup, or I knew someone who knew someone, and they were basically looking for a generalist / runner / person that's willing to do everything. And the first job I did was work as a quality assurance engineer with no coding experience or testing experience. Didn't really know what I was doing.
Wow.
No, I was not tasting ice cream. I had 20. What effect? It was called. The company was called NES. It's no longer around now. It was sort of hit by COVID. But the idea was you're a restaurant or a coffee shop or a bar. You've got a blackboard offer. How do you easily communicate that to office workers in the area? And how do you drive footfall through that? So I literally had 20 phones out in front of me, and every day I'd come in and I would test the app and make sure that it was working properly. I did that. I did some marketing.
Wow.
Nice.
And then I did door-to-door sales.
And then
And the door-to-door sales was brutal. It was really, really hard. But it was...
I assume all B2B, door-to-door, like knocking on restaurants.
Oh yeah, knocking on restaurants. A lot of the work we did was with independents, but we did work with a few chains. So like Pizza Express for a client of ours. We did some work with like some other large name brands, but it was mostly independent local restaurants. And as someone who like sort of loves food, it was a dream job in some ways, but it was pretty brutal. And I think at the organisation they did a lot of things right, but one of the things they perhaps didn't get right was hiring, especially hiring senior staff. And it just so happened that we'd made a few mishires, and that aligned with an opportunity at Applied coming up, and the two and two sort of really felt like they spoke to each other, and it felt like the right time to make the move. So then I joined Applied.
Yeah.
Have the stars ever aligned more?
Well, who knows? if that's the most aligned my stars ever become in my life, then I I'm going to be bitterly disappointed, Chris.
What's the background? What's the product story of Applied?
Yeah. So I think this is the only time when I would ever encourage anybody to talk about the year that their company was founded. You know, when you go to those sort of talks, they say we were founded in X by one person, and it's boring. I think this is the only time that's actually relevant. So Applied comes from a governing body or government body called the Behavioural Insights Team, more colloquially known as the Nudge Unit. So the Nudge Unit was set up in 2011 by Cameron and Clegg under the coalition government, and effectively looked to use behavioural science to inform policy decisions. Think why you have your pension as an opt-out versus an opt-in. That's an intervention that the Nudge Unit was responsible for, and it increased the proportion of people contributing to their pensions by like 30-40%. What they realised in the unit is hiring is incredibly unfair. Hiring is prone to 180 odd biases. Hiring results in the wrong people being hired in certain jobs and the right people being overlooked. And Kate Glazebrook, who was one of the principals at BIT, founded Applied off the back of a research project in 2017. So that's the background and sort of evidence-based research that's gone into the organisation. I think at the core of why we exist is, like, I'm sure you talk about this time and time again, but there's a war for talent that most organisations are losing, and we believe they're losing it because they're focusing on the wrong thing. They're focusing far too much on the volume of candidates they can source, the speed of their process, things like time to hire, and what they're not focusing on is the skills of candidates, the values that they have and the potential that they have, and being conscious about making decisions that are sort of done carefully with all of the data that you can have around the quality of an applicant. So I think sort of we serve to challenge organisations to introduce fairer hiring process, and we serve to challenge them because getting hiring wrong is costly, and we also serve candidates, of whom we often forget every single person that's hiring has once been a candidate, to have a better experience, an experience actually that they deserve, which is to be treated equally, to be treated fairly, and to be part of a meritocratic recruitment process. So that's sort of the product story and how the idea came about.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I remember reading the Nudge Unit, and I don't know how much for the savings they made, but it was unbelievable in terms of just little tweaks, little changes can have such a huge difference.
Yeah, small changes, big impact, right? Like that's what nudging is at its core.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you offer then at Applied? Because obviously you go into your website, there's a number of different kind of services. But if you can talk through the kind of the mainstream kind of products you have.
Yeah, I would say there's sort of 3 or 4 softwares or technologies that we sell and that we provide organisations. So the first is a standalone job description tool that strips out gendered language, ensures you're writing effective job descriptions that aren't too wordy, don't have acronyms, aren't cumbersome to read for applicants. We know applicants are going to review JDs on their phone in sub 10 seconds. So that's actually when Chris and I first got talking, was about that bit of tech at RecFest. It should be seen as like Grammarly on steroids for your job descriptions. And mind I say, actually costs a fraction of some competitors in the space like Textio. And generally speaking, we tend to provide that to larger talent teams for, funnily enough, the pharmaceutical industry. So we work with Pfizer across their whole European office, as well as tech companies that have sort of talent acquisition teams of anywhere going upwards of 5 people. So what 3 words, ASOS, they use our tech for that. So that's one product. The other products all form a part of our applicant tracking system. So we offer an ATS that has all of the sort of standard functionality that you would expect from any ATS, automating the hiring process, posting to job boards, shortlisting, interviewing, scheduling, sending offer letters, making hiring decisions, but in a way that uses more predictive, fair elements of a hiring process. For example, the interview module is structured, or at the very least semi-structured. So every candidate that's going through an organisation that's using Applied to Hire would be asked the same questions, would be scored by multiple people, and would be scored against the marking rubric. And built into the tool is ensuring that sort of hiring managers are hiring as fairly as possible. The same for reviewing CVs anonymously, the same for reviewing work samples. And then I guess the last bit of tech that feeds into that most of our management consultancy clients use, like LEK or OC&C or CIL management consultants for their grad schemes, is like a psychometric assessment that's designed to assess for consulting skills. So like a numerical skills test that strips bias out of the process that typically, traditionally through normal assessments like SHL, results in men performing better than women, not for lack of actually being mathematically able.
I also saw a really good quote of yours the other day on this, because you've been talking a lot recently about this particular subject, haven't you? I saw a video. Is it Unmatched or something? You were being interviewed by. I really liked the quote that you used to the crowd there, and you could see the whole crowd were like, oh, finally. Finally, someone's building something that's actually doing this stuff, rather than just talking about it.
Yeah, I was at Wiser's Making Move event. They just launched actually a really interesting piece of research all around like getting more women into tech sales, because tech sales teams are pretty homogenous. I think like pretty much every single tech sales tech team could do better at representation, including ourselves, to be honest.
Yeah.
But like, I think, I really appreciate you saying that point, Chris, because like the diversity and inclusion space needs to change. This is my personal take. This isn't Applied to take, and I need to be clear on that. Like, diversity and inclusion is like this thing that like we put in working groups and you just go talk in the corner and then come back to us whilst we do the actual work that's revenue driving. I think that's bullshit, basically. Am I allowed to swear on this? Am I allowed?
You are, yeah. You are, but Chris isn't.
Like, I think it's not. I think it's not right. Basically, like it's diversity and inclusion isn't like a project. Being meritocratic isn't something that should be lip service. It should be like embedded into how you do things and how you run your organisation, and hiring is a part of that.
Love that. I mean, and so true.
Yeah.
Like really like deeply mean it, and it's such. I think actually quite a lot of times when we've engaged Bradley after that first RecFest meeting, what year was that? 2017.
Yeah, it was early. It was really early.
Yeah, whatever it was, I can't remember. It was a few years ago. ever since then, whenever we've chatted, we're talking about like blind hiring and how that does it fix, does it not fix?
Well, I think like it's fair to say most organisations. Speaking of blind hiring, like most organisations that are told to anonymously recruit are given absolutely no guidance as to how to get it right, and are sort of expected to collect CVs through, say, Workable, manually remove names from the CV, or turn on their tool, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and then have no way of rigorously actually reviewing them, and then only end up falling back on the heuristic biases that mean you're more likely to recruit those that have been in the position for the last 5 years, that look and speak and sound similar to the people that are already in your team, and then turn around and say anonymous hiring doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work. It's really de-biased hiring that you need. It's offering a structure and a framework and objectivity, which means scoring, to as many parts of the hiring process as you can, with a guidance given from the hiring manager on what they're actually looking for. I think more often than not, people figure out what they're looking for once they start recruiting for a role, and that's too late. You need to decide early.
And then also, I think removing bias at the top, right? Is like having a why are we doing this in the first place, and not just doing it because we don't have enough, of this or that in my team, right? That also sucks, because you end up getting into the positive discrimination element, right? It's like you're getting a job because, which is also, I feel super uncomfortable with, even though it is part of the Force the Agenda movement, right? I still feel uncomfortable with it. I don't think we're fixing the problem. I think that when we boil that back down, the why needs to be dug into, and then with blind hiring and training and coaching and metrics and measurements are super important. That give it a foundation.
I firmly believe that like affirmative action or positive action is like counter to the cause of trying to improve representation. It's my personal take. If you're having to take positive action, you're going to result in people in your organisation feeling as though those who are underrepresented, like women in board positions or disabled people throughout your organisation, where I think there's only like 13% representation of those who are disabled in actually the working world, people are going to look at that and say, oh, that's tokenistic, it's lip service. And those people are going to be less likely to actually feel like they belong in the organisation. They're going to feel less likely to be respected in the organisation. And you're going to create a divide between those that are seen as being progressive and those that aren't. And I think that that's only going to be costly to the sort of culture that you want to create. So from my perspective, strip bias out, make better hiring decisions, and hire people based on merit. Our original tagline used to be, hire the best person for the job regardless of background. And I think that's because all too often, like you hear people who are anti-woke, the left, this is political correctness gone mad, say, we just want to hire the right person, and if they are the right person and they just so happen to be called Bradley and they're a white straight man, so be it, couldn't actually be further from the truth. Because the same sorts of people might also turn around and say, I have no bias. And we run an exercise with people where we show how everyone has bias by getting them to uncover actually their biases in like a live working example that's taken from Daniel Kahneman's book. So I think, it's really important to sort of reframe the narrative and create, in short, before organisations use applied, there has to be emotional, there has to be what's the word I'm looking for? Like a willingness for people to get things wrong publicly and not be demonized for it in their organisation. And I think that's why sort of we have so many B Corps using our tech and so many sort of charities that use our tech.
Interestingly, just follow up on that, are you using that as criteria in any way to decide whether because it is a two-way street, right? I want to buy applied, but you might not want to serve it to me because I haven't, I don't know, how are you assessing it? Are you coming and doing that, or are you posing yourselves as part of the solution, and once you're in, we can help isolate?
He's smiling at this.
Who do we not work with? We don't work with a few types of organisations out of principle, and I would strongly encourage any organisation that's mission-led to blacklist arms companies, like companies that are associated with military production. We don't work with any organisations that are in the tobacco industry, and we don't work with any organisations that are in the gambling industry. Like, we can't say that we want to improve representation and we want to make the world a better place whilst, earnestly actually working with those sorts of companies. I think in terms of the sort of organisation we work with, there are a few like triggers or things that we look for. Generally speaking, if you're calling your HR teams people or culture in title, that's a good indication that you actually care about these sorts of things. If you have somebody who's dedicated to improving representation, like a D&I manager, that's often also a good indication. But again, we don't want those people to sort of sit outside of the boardroom and outside of making proper decisions on things that impact the business. I think if you're over 25 people, like if you're hiring less, you probably don't need an applicant tracking system unless you're really going through scaling. But yeah, I think like a couple that spring to mind that really align with what we're doing would be like Ella's Kitchen, B-Lab, Habito, like those sorts of organisations that are often transforming the sector that they're in. Like Habito, if you've ever got a mortgage, you've been fortunate enough to have enough money to get a mortgage in this current economy, you would know how much of an absolute nightmare it is. They're trying to change that, and a willingness to change the industry that you're in usually aligns with a willingness to change the way that you do things, and hiring is no exception. So that's sort of a...
We got our mortgage. We got our mortgage, by the way. It's a great...
There you go. So free plus.
I say we. My partner did all the work. I just said yes. But I heard her experience was excellent with it. So yeah, cool. You guys are B Corp.
Do you know what's funny? We were in Escape the City top 100. I think we ranked 52 this year of like places to work. But
congratulations.
Thank you. We're an Escape the City partner. We've actually got a partnership that we're launching with them. We're doing a webinar with them in a couple of weeks. We are finalising our B Corp status. So whilst we work with B-Lab, it's been something we've wanted to do for years. Don't quote me on this. I think it's going to be a couple of months, and we should have that all sealed, signed, delivered.
You talked about job advert analyzer, and then you talk about obviously the CV. You talk about debiasing. Yeah. What about the interview process, where you're going into companies and you see obviously what they're using at the moment, and then they put your interview tool in? What are you seeing the benefits from the companies, and any kind of case studies or research you can share?
I think let's start with the problem with interviewing, which is there are two studies, and I've spoken about this at the Making Moves session. There are two studies that have been done that look at the time in which you can accurately predict the outcome of an interview if it's unstructured. One study says
it's not 30
One study says 4 minutes. Another study says 10 seconds. Okay?
Wow.
That's with unstructured. I can send you the studies, and that's with unstructured. What do we mean by unstructured? Yeah. Unstructured interviews are when you're just having a chat. You don't have a predefined series of questions. There's no scoring. There's no note taking, and there's certainly no individual review prior to a discussion to prevent groupthink. So that's the problem that we're up against, which is you're then more likely to hire somebody that aligns with really the person that looks and speaks like the person that's in the role now, or that's in your team now, or the person that you expect that person to look like, that more often than not you would have affinity with, and affinity bias would result in selecting them over someone that might be more skilled. So we have a module that plugs into the tool, that once you've scheduled an interview, and our tech integrates with Zoom, Google Meet, as well as sort of Outlook and Google Calendars. Once you schedule an interview, all of the people in that interview can input their notes, score against the marking rubric, and do so on a question-by-question basis, so that you're not making decisions that are completely reliant on this vague sense of whether or not you do or don't like the person, or think they may or may not be able to do the job. And we always nudge people towards testing for skills. And testing for skills is often seen as this vague thing, like what does that actually mean? It means not just going through someone's resume and getting them to talk about their past. It means actually placing them as close as you can in the job, in the interview. So hiring an engineer, getting them to do a coding task and scoring them on how they do it. Hiring a salesperson, having them articulate their value to you in the form of an interview, or get them to pitch your product back to you. Marketeer, come up with a 30, 60, 90-day strategy. Whatever it is, get as close to the job as possible, and you'll do much better in assessing people accurately. So I think those results are what we've seen result in hiring 2 to 4 times more people of colour across the board. Those results are what we've seen result in, you know, a 30% increase in the representation of women in tech roles. And that's across sort of all of the organisations that we support on average.
And there's fantastic results.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Are you doing the assessments? Are they in platform?
They're sort of, we've got a library of questions, like we've got a bank of questions and templates that you might want to use. There's 400 work samples. There's like standard recommended CV review questions, and there is guidance around interviews. But by the time you get to interviewing, most organisations have a pretty good idea of what they want to look for. I would say a lot of organisations that adopt Applied, they're doing this sort of stuff manually already. Like they're with Workable or Greenhouse or Lever up to the point that they interview, and then they sack it off for a spreadsheet, and then desperately try and piece it all together later on. If you're doing that and you're not using Applied, you should be. I think it's sort of the target market that we're going for.
How many companies do you think in the market, and this is obviously just going on your experience, what percentage are using structured interviews?
Yeah, I think not enough, basically. Like, not enough companies are structuring their interviews. I think it's a two-way street. Like, if you're a recruiter and you're in Chris's position and Chris's team, and you're working for a really early stage startup, and you're trying to basically headhunt people to join an early stage organisation, it's like 20, 30 people, I don't think that the first conversations you have are an interview. I think they're a sales pitch as much as anything. They're a sales conversation. They're a discovery call. You're understanding what their needs are. You're aligning those needs to what the organisation can offer, and you're seeing if they're interested in joining. I'm suggesting that at the point I'm suggesting that at the point at which you actually are, you've got 5 candidates that are interested. I'm suggesting that you then assess them in the form of an interview using a more predictive, structured method. And I think there's a blurred line in most hiring processes between those two things. And I think that's unhealthy. And I also think it's not fair, because I think that you're more likely to end up landing a role if you look, speak, sound more like the recruiter that you're talking to, more like the hiring manager that you're talking to, and more often than not, given there's a lack of representation in tech, all of the people that are at that organisation. And that's how you build up a diversity debt that then becomes very difficult to pay off, and is a problem that you can only ever imagine how damaging it can be once it's too late, or once you're in a position where it's really hard to reverse. So I think that's sort of my take on structured interviewing.
You've obviously been in the TA space now for several years. Love to hear your take on the industry at the moment and your view in the market.
Well, I think in terms of what we're seeing, I'm going to split it into the candidate side and the employer side. So if we look at tech specifically, there was a massive boom in terms of salaries and expectations a couple, I'd say 12 months back. That's dipped. So like salaries were heavily inflated. Take sales, for instance. You had mid-market account executives demanding £100,000 to £120,000 on the base. I think we spoke about this, Chris. Double OTE working for a Series A tech startup. I think the techplosion, if we can call it that, has put downward pressure on salaries, especially in those sort of traditional tech roles. Think engineering, CS, sales, marketing, product managers, you name it. I think despite the pressure that we're seeing on salaries, and actually like cost of living, inflation, everything going up, packet of crisps costing £5, there was previously an asymmetry of information between candidates and employers, and I think that's closing. So if I think about the space that I work in, tech sales, you've got RepView, Glassdoor, Otter, Escape the City, they all offer free salary benchmarking so that candidates, even if they're going into a salary negotiation where they might earn slightly less than if they got a job 12 months ago, they're more well informed as to what their value is.
It's so surprising as well, Bradley, how many companies are not doing the same and going and getting that information before they decide how much they want to pay for these roles and trying to figure out what's fair, right? I always like the play of like look backwards first. It's like who in my team is not earning that now? Then I'm not fair. We need to change something internally first before we make a hire. Otherwise, it just keeps breaking, right? Just nothing. There's always this pay gap that's getting bigger and bigger.
And then, I think on that, like the final thing we're seeing from a candidate side is like an increasing focus on values, culture, and commitment to like building a people-first, people-centric organisation. Like, as much as there are lots of amazing candidates on the market now that, due to layoffs, I think like fair treatment is something that's expected, especially in the tech world. On the employer side, to that end, I think the lip service following Black Lives Matters that we saw when I was at Applied 3 or so years ago, that's over. And I see it as a good thing that that's over. Like writing a post that's just we're in support of BLM on your LinkedIn isn't sufficient in like showing that you're going to create pardon? Or blacking out Instagram on a Tuesday. Exactly. It's not. It's sort of insulting if you continue to have a board that's all male and
Or the rainbow banner.
It's all nice things. Right? They're all nice things to do, but they're not just like systematic change. On the employer side, I think what we're seeing is increasing like people do want to do the right thing, but the manual time spent around doing the right thing creates conflict within organisations, perhaps more than previously. So I was on a LinkedIn debate, like a discussion around anonymous recruitment the other day. Someone was like, it just takes way too long. And if you do it manually, I'm not surprised it does. And then finally, I guess, given the work that we do with the charity sector, like we work with UNICEF, we work with Comic Relief, Trussell Trust, like big charities, they, I think, are struggling to attract and retain, not those charities specifically, I think the sector as a whole are struggling to attract and maintain and retain rather, like the highest quality candidates that previously could have taken a hit on their salary, because lots of those young graduates, for example, they're going to mission-led startups, or they're going to sort of social enterprise type organizations like Beam, or they're doing Teach First, for instance, that might pay them more and lead to a more lucrative career path, because of the pressure that's being put on salaries. I think tech is basically, even though it's been squashed a little bit in terms of salaries, it's still going to earn a lot more working in that space than the charity sector. So charities have to do more than ever to stand out.
Yeah.
Do you think that's been affected? I can't remember, you used a cool term for techsplosion. Like, what about layoff Mageddon? Like, what have you seen? What have you seen at the other end of the cycle? Are you seeing a change yet? Too early?
Yeah, I think like companies are really scared of getting things wrong. And if you overhired, like on the back of COVID ending, and then had to lay loads of people off, you're scared of making the same mistake again and then being penalised for it. And I think one of the pressures that's driving that fear is the way in which venture capital firms, to my understanding, are putting organisations under pressure to be profitable over being like large and dominating the market, right? So like most companies are being told, you want your next fundraising round, we need to see how this is actually a feasible business that has a P&L that makes sense and that isn't just earning money.
Focusing on costs is one of the key things they're looking at. I think it comes back to your point about in terms of candidates. Everyone's impacted by the cost of living. Yeah. That's having a knock-on effects as well.
Yeah, totally.
Totally agree. I was chatting to Catherine Alani, who's the talent director over at Omar Ventures, and we were talking just literally about this subject. Like now, VCs are like, how are you planning to build your team is on the table. It's not just a team slide anymore with a couple of fancy logos on it. It's like, yeah, that's cool. We got that from LinkedIn. How are you going to plan building your team is also slowing deployment of capital at the moment. It's like they're like, oh, I'm not sure you've got what it takes to scale a business. We're gonna pass on this opportunity. She's doing some really, really, really interesting stuff, by the way, on looking at how founders, the values and competencies that make you a great founder.
I don't think I've heard of
She's
that.
been like pivotal. Catherine Alani. She really, really, really interesting lunch with her the other day. She's got a fascinating profile, really, really fascinating profile. Background is, I'll do a bad job. I'm not even going to try. She's a super fascinating profile, from talent into like chief of staff, VP scaling, like hands in lots of pots, seen how to build really effective teams. Gone to this venture capitalist firm or accelerator, they've got an accelerator as well, and she's really now looking at not just how are their investments, deploying the capital and building teams, but also like, how do we find founders? How do we use what we know in building teams into finding the core competencies that make you a great founder? And there are several profiles that make you great. There's not just one. There's several, I think, different types of founder that they've defined. Again, maybe we need to get her on, Darren.
Yeah.
There's some like absolutely fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's not
Series
tech,
2,
so
maybe.
we'll have to find a way.
Yeah.
Build something. Put it down on
What are
Notion.
the TA tools you noticed in the sort of TA tech space that you're most excited
So
about?
I think there's one bit of tech that I really like, and it's because it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It just tries, I think that all innovative technology should enable you to do something that you might already be doing or aspiring to do in terms of process better, quicker. So I think MetaView, and I mentioned this to you earlier, MetaView and Tidal and the team, they're building really interesting tech for transcribing interviews better. And just saving recruiters an immense amount of time in manually typing up parts of their interview process. I'd also see it making hiring fairer, because if you have a transcript of, this is what we've spoken about, then you've got more visibility, you've got more objectivity, and it actually should nudge people towards structuring their interviews as well. Yeah.
And accountability as well. I think that's another big part of it that we liked. I think there's a couple of things, because Sal's going to be on the show with us. We want to unpack on privacy and stuff like that are super interesting, which you raised with us. We put down the question.
As for AI and like the rest, I've not used it yet. I want to see it. I've seen it, but I've not used it personally.
We're using it 2x time back. Like it's an unreal piece of tech. Like we're honestly, it's like probably the only thing that we've used in, what are we now, like 8-9 years of trading as a business, with recruiters deployed and doing lots of work on different accounts. It's the only tool that's really given us back that amount of time. Really, well, bar Microsoft's LinkedIn recruiter account.
I mean, unlimited emails.
Yeah, they have unlimited emails like that.
But there you go. Yeah, I think in terms of like other tools in the TA space, like AI is going to be thrown around a lot. My message to anybody listening to this, and I hope there's enough people listening to this to get it across, is like you and Darren are listening to me. I think we need to approach the use of AI incredibly cautiously. And that's not just because I work for an organisation that's focused on mitigating systemic biases, and it's not because I'm scared of universal AI that can act like a human and steal our jobs, and we're in this sort of dystopian future. I think it's because AI actually isn't new. AI has just exploded since ChatGPT and OpenAI went live. In 2018, Amazon introduced an AI bot that automatically screened resumes, and it screened resumes in a way that systemically disadvantaged female candidates. Why? Because it was built off the back of a data set that humans systemically disadvantage female candidates. We teach it. So the source that you feed your AI bot is only ever as, or bot or large language model is only as good. The AI is only as good as the source that you fed it. And that AI recruiting tool that Amazon used, it got scrapped. It got scrapped in 2018.
Yeah. Google tried as well, right, with their ATS, which we tried to use for a little bit. I thought it was going to be a game changer. I thought they've got the data set. It's over. The game's over now. They're going to be able to automate anything, but they didn't. They didn't seem to figure out where it fit in their stack. They couldn't quite work out where they wanted it to be. I was chatting to Steve Levy the other day. I don't know if you guys know him, like famous sourcing guy. Like, love his stuff, love him. He's such a ball of energy. He's such a good person to speak with. And he was saying, like, the first question he directs at people the second they use AI is like, where's the information from? What are you building the AI? What's it learning from? If they can't evidence that, then he starts to break down like this isn't going to work. I think he's got a software engineering background.
Yeah, I'd like to make a plug, which is there's a really good course that's called AI. Let me just find who does it. AI for Everyone. It's free on Coursera. The instructor Andrew is like one of the leading experts on AI. It takes 10 hours to complete. I think, just from the sake of like being able to understand conversations that are going to be happening in your workplaces. And if you're a recruiter and people are pushing tools on you and saying, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, it will give a really good basis of knowledge that should be valuable. So I'd
great, we'll add it to the links to the notes. I think we were we can have Sayo obviously talk about this and he'd share with it, but he does reference a framework, which is there are two sides about AI, but obviously people are fearful of it. And then on the second side, there's obviously people who are trying to embrace it. But when at that point, the case you made obviously about Amazon, there's probably three things he looks at, which is AI is there. If it's for automation in terms of improving, then we should definitely consider it. And if it's for detection, then yes, then then we should actually explore that. But when we talk about decision making, where actually AI is taking that job like it did with Amazon, scraping CVs and obviously filtering out the candidates. That's where there's additional scrutiny, and then when you look at obviously like MetaView and where they're in the space, they're very much taking what is day to day happening across most companies, interviewing candidates, and it's taking those interview notes, formatting it exactly how you want it to, and ability to share it. And there's no decision making there. It's just speeding up productivity there. Completely.
Like, I would love to think that through Applied, at some point we would have some AI in our tech. Don't quote me on it happening in the next month, but like, making it easy to automate building a gender-neutral job description from scratch for a role you're hiring in, great. Using it to come up with effective interview questions that you can then edit and tweak, great. Using AI to actually do the interview itself and make the decision, I'm hesitant. And I think that if you focus too intently on speed over everything, you'll end up having to go back on the mistakes that you've made. And I think that's really like my message to people when they look at all of these shiny AI tools that are going to make everything quicker. Doesn't mean they're going to make everything better. You might just have double the amount of mess to clean up.
Really insightful, and thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for being here. I've loved it. Invite me to the next.
Good fun. And we kept it to an hour just, including a break. So we've done
great. Look,
Thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Darren. All the best.
This is TA Unboxed, signing off.